progression and laying the foundation for an incredible economic turnaround. 15 consecutive months of robust job creation. The most recent jobs report showing that 431,000 jobs were created, approaching approximately 8 million good-paying jobs that have been created during President Biden's time in office, a record in American presidential history, fastest rate of economic growth in 40 years. Unemployment has now dropped to 3.6%. It was 6.4% when President Biden took office just a short while ago. Wages continue to go up. And of course, the deficit has been reduced during his first year in office by more than $350 billion and may be reduced by in excess of $1 trillion during his second full year in office. This is a tremendous foundation for the American people. Doesn't just happen automatically, doesn't just happen magically. It happens as a result of presidential leadership and partnership with Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate, and we'll continue that work this week, in part by making sure that distressed restaurants and small businesses are able to receive the relief that was originally promised to them, but because of overwhelming demand in terms of funds weren't previously available. That's bipartisan legislation with respect to distressed restaurants and small businesses that will be led by Representative Blumenauer. And we, of course, will continue to shine a spotlight for the American people on some of the activities that are taking place that are resulting in the high gas prices that people are experiencing, led by Chairman Frank Pallone and Congresswoman Subcommittee Chairwoman Diana DeGette. Of course, there will be a subcommittee hearing on price gouging that is taking place by some companies that are making record profits, but instead of passing savings along to the American people, are pouring it into stock buybacks and wealthy shareholders becoming even wealthier at the expense of the American people. And we're going to make sure that the full story is told, both as it relates to Putin's price hike connected to gas prices, as well as some of the price gouging that is taking place this week. It's now my honor to yield to our distinguished Vice Chair, Pete Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This week, the House will hold two of former President Trump's most loyal confidants in contempt of Congress. Last week, I highlighted a passage from Judge Carter's ruling, and I wanted to read it here again because it gets to the heart of why we're voting this week, our work as a select committee, and the responsibility entrusted to all of us on behalf of the American people. The quote, if Dr. Eastman and President Trump's plan had worked, it would have permanently ended a peaceful transition of power, undermining American democracy and the Constitution. If the country does not commit to investigating and pursuing accountability for those responsible, the court fears January 6 will repeat itself. Those are the stakes of the investigation that we have in front of us and why it's so important to refer Dan Scavino and Peter Navarro to the Justice Department for contempt of Congress. These aides to the former president have refused to provide a single piece of evidence despite our lawful subpoenas. Their failure to comply sets them apart from nearly every other witness and leaves us no other option. This is as clear a case of contempt as we have seen. House Democrats are committed to the principle that no one is above the law, and each and every day we get closer to ensuring that the perpetrators of the attempt to overturn the election are held accountable so this doesn't happen again. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Pete. Any questions?
I have a two-part question. One, are you getting any kind of sense on if the House will actually vote on the COVID preparedness bill this week? And what is your message to the Democrats who rebelled against including that in the omnibus, and now you guys are voting on something that's $5 billion less and doesn't have the global vaccines in there?
Well, Leader Hoyer will speak to the timing at the caucus meeting earlier today. He did not mention a precise date or time that we'll be voting on it, but some of that may depend on when the Senate acts. And in terms of whatever is sent to us, and to the extent it does not include assistance for COVID relief in other parts of the world, that will be a work in progress that will need to continue. I think we have a general understanding within the House Democratic Caucus that this pandemic is not over for any of us until it's over for all of us. And that as the wealthiest country in the history of the world, the leader of the free world, we have a responsibility to decisively crush this virus wherever it may be found, and certainly to help underdeveloped countries do that. It's the right thing to do, but it's in the best interest of the American people, and I know our work in that regard will continue.
We've heard many of your Democratic colleagues calling for Title 42 to remain in place until there's a comprehensive plan to sort of deal with what they say is a disaster for border management. Republicans have signed this discharge petition. Where do you stand on the issue, and is this something that you and your colleagues would support?
Well, we're awaiting action from the president and some visibility into how the administration decides to proceed. I have great confidence in the administration in terms of both making sure that we continue to lift up border security while also recognizing that we have laws related to asylum, and those laws should be brought to life in the fullest possible way in the context of the moment that we're in. And I don't want to get out ahead of the administration in this regard. Members are actively discussing a way forward here. I think House Democrats are unanimously committed to the notion that we are both a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. And finding a way forward to lift up those two very important principles, I think, is a commitment amongst House Democrats. But let me yield to our Vice Chair, Pete Aguilar.
I think the chairman said it well. But let's step back for a minute and talk about, Title 42 was put in as by the former president as a stalking horse for border security. It was cloaked in pandemic discussion, but the pandemic has changed. So Republicans want us to talk about things opening up and coming back, businesses, while we're moving forward with the pandemic, because the underlying health conditions have changed in this country, and we acknowledge that. That doesn't ignore that we are still back to 2 years ago and the concerns that we have about making sure we honor what the chairman said, that we are both a nation of laws and a compassionate nation. We can't pick and choose which refugees and which asylum seekers come to this country, whether they are Central American or whether they are Ukrainian. And so we're working with the administration, and the administration has indicated that they have plans to address this, but we are moving past this pandemic, and the next phase of that is the removal of Title 42. And so we will continue to, with the appropriate committees, work to make sure we are prepared for the eventualities of that ending. But let's not forget that the former president put this in because he wanted to send a message about the border, not because he wanted to protect the American public from a pandemic. He proved time and time again that was never in his top 3 priorities. So we're moving forward, and we will work with the administration to make sure that they have the tools and the resources to address this.
Back to this side. Yeah, thanks.
On the restaurant relief bill coming up this week, I mean, this is something that members have wanted for some time. What are you doing to reconcile everyone's different priorities heading into this?
Well, I think under President Biden's leadership, the leadership of Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer, we have been actively moving to address a whole wide variety of issues. I laid out clear evidence of that in the context of where we were when President Biden took office. The economy was on the brink of collapse, and the steps that we've taken to turn the situation around significantly, starting with the American Rescue Plan, continuing through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Finally, infrastructure investment. There had been every other week for decades, Infrastructure Week, and nothing ever happened. And under President Biden's leadership, we have historic investment in our nation's infrastructure. 2 weeks ago, we were able to move forward on a bipartisan spending package to meet the needs and priorities of the American people. But the work, of course, continues. And so this week, it appears we will be able to move forward on bipartisan legislation led by Democrats to address this issue of distressed restaurants and small businesses. And so the work will always continue, but our track record speaks for itself. Back to first round.
Republicans seem to want to use the ending of Title 42 as an election topic. How concerned are you about the surge that's predicted to come and them using that in the midterm election to hurt Democrats?
I think we have to continue to govern responsibly, and again, we'll wait for presidential action in this area. But we have a strong story to tell, and the Republicans have nothing but rhetoric. And often that rhetoric has no basis in reality. They have no governing agenda. They aren't putting forth ideas. And they're unwilling, of course, to denounce the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party, the pro-insurrection wing of the Republican Party, and the pro-hate wing of the Republican Party. Instead, it's just rhetoric, often nonsense, with no good ideas being put forth to help out everyday Americans. So I'm not concerned about the Republican rhetoric.
I was just wondering, so you guys are getting ready to go to conference on the Competes Act. I asked Speaker Pelosi about this, and I wanted to hear you guys' take. So there's a part in the Competes Act that it calls for increased cooperation with China about climate change, but it also takes action to crack down on their human rights abuses. I was just wondering, you guys, how you plan to kind of reconcile those two things, cracking down on them for one thing and then trying to cooperate on another.
Well, I'll yield to Pete on this, but we are dealing with a complex geopolitical environment all across the world, a globalized economy, and so there are challenges that we have to work through in the context of a globalized economy, and that, of course, includes China as a major player, while at the same time we have to be true to our values as a free and fair society, as the leader of the free world. And we'll see what comes out of the conference committee, but I'll have every confidence that, one, the speaker will designate individuals who are knowledgeable, strong, committed to making sure that America is put in the most competitive position so that our economy works for everyday Americans, while working through some of these geopolitical challenges to make sure that we also are lifting up our values and the importance of human rights and respecting the dignity of others.
Yeah, I think the chairman's right. Part of this is a discussion about the geopolitical environment, and some of them are bilateral discussions among the countries, and other topics will be addressed within this piece of legislation. I don't think it's going to surprise anyone in this room that the chairman and I are fans of the House-passed piece of legislation and the language there, but we're going to give the space to the negotiators to try to craft a deal that is bipartisan and bicameral. And then we look forward to working with our colleagues to make that into law. But this is an important piece of legislation, a lot of details to work through. I share the chairman's confidence that the speaker will put people at the table who represent the views of the House Democratic Caucus, and we'll go from there.
If I could just follow up briefly on this about, so we know China is one of the biggest polluters in the world. Why is your caucus so adamant about increasing the cooperation on climate change when they're one of the biggest polluters? What is the end game? What is the goal here?
Well, I think what is clear is that in order for us to deal with the climate crisis comprehensively and with the fierce urgency of now, it's going to involve decisive action by the United States, decisive action by China, decisive action by India, I believe the three largest contributors to carbon pollution across the globe, and of course decisive action by the European Union collectively, plus Great Britain. And so I think that is the right approach because you can't simply solve the problem with just the United States alone acting. And a big part of the challenge is China and India and the European Union in partnership with Great Britain. And so I think it's the right approach. It's anchored in the factual realities on the ground and in the air and in the soil and in the water across the globe. And I think it's the global approach that will continue with leadership from President Biden.
I have a question for the Vice Chair. I'm not asking you to confirm anything, but there are now reports that Ivanka Trump is expected to speak to the January 6th committee today. And I know the committee earlier this year, or maybe it was even last year, sent her like an 11-page letter with sort of why she's of interest. Can you just maybe sort of, I mean, why is she so important to talk to? If that's
I'd refer you back to the letter. But at its core, we're interested in talking to individuals who were in and around the former president and the White House during this important time, during January 5th and 6th, as well as the lead up and the many events that were orchestrated by those who were close to the former president that had, as Judge Carter said, a coup in need of a legal strategy. And so, those are the pieces that we're interested in. And so, we're going to continue to ask these questions. I'm not talking about, any particular individual, but we're going to ask and continue to ask a lot of questions. But I will say broadly, we've announced about 100 subpoenas. And we've had, as you've heard me say from this podium, over 800 interviews. So for every subpoena that we announce, there are many others that we don't announce that are just part of us doing our job to seek the truth, to get to the events of what transpired, and to make sure at its core, legislatively, that we do what we can to make sure that this never happens again. So irrespective of any individuals, we're going to continue to move forward and to ensure that we're getting to the truth.
On the hearing tomorrow with the oil company executives, what is the message or the lesson that you hope people take out of the hearing tomorrow? What do you want folks to learn?
Well, I'll defer to Chairman Pallone and Subcommittee Chairwoman Diana DeGette in that regard. However, I think generally we want to make it clear to the American people that House Democrats are on the case. Gas prices, of course, are a complex issue in the context of both the geopolitical environment and decisions that are being made by these oil and gas companies and executives explicitly to take the record profits that they are making and reinvest them in the shareholder class as opposed to the consumer class. That's a problem. And part of the job of the United States Congress is to hold people to account, particularly in an environment where you have a war of aggression that is taking place in the Ukraine. And as a result of Putin's war of aggression, you have increased gas prices that have accelerated since he began to threaten Ukraine a few months ago and then invaded. And in the context of that international crisis, and we'll continue to stand behind the people of Ukraine who are fighting heroically and make sure they have everything that they need to ultimately prevail, as they will. I think it's important for American corporations, as we've seen others do, to show some patriotism and to stand on the side of everyday Americans. And at the hearing, at least, I think there'll be an opportunity to explore with these gas and oil executives what that kind of patriotism should look like. At minimum, it should involve ensuring that perhaps there's some relief that consumers and everyday Americans experience in the form of lower gas prices, given the incredible record profits that oil and gas companies are making right now. We'll go back here, and then last question.
When is the House going to vote on the restaurant bill?
I'm not sure. I don't think Steny mentioned that in particular, or I may have missed it, but he certainly can provide a precise answer to that question. I think it's Thursday. Thursday. Last question.
On the COVID money, the global vaccine money, what's the way forward on this? I mean, is it appropriating new money? Is it moving around money that's already been allocated? And does it have to be done before the next appropriation bills go out, or are you looking to do it sooner?
Yeah, it's my understanding that one, the additional funding will be completely paid for, and that's been an approach that we've taken responsibly. It's one of the reasons why we continue to experience tremendous economic growth, and at the same time, of course, haven't added to the deficit. It's been dramatically reduced. In terms of the actual mechanism that will be employed, we'll see what the Senate sends over, right? The text is available. I don't want to get out ahead of those who have been leading the effort on our side in terms of whether that's something that we're comfortable with or whether there are proposed adjustments that may need to be made. But it's my understanding that the funding will not be taken away from any particular state, right, that may have unexhausted funds. But we also understand that there was probably some waste, fraud, abuse, or people who had access to funds that that may need to be reconsidered. So we'll see ultimately what the House settles on. The Senate legislation is out there to be reviewed.
Specifically, the global vaccine money that's not in there. You said that you're going to continue to work on this. So, is this something that you guys envision getting done? Before the next
let me.
Bills go out? I mean, how time sensitive is this, and when do you hope to do something, move something forward?
Yeah, let me yield to our resident appropriator on that question.
No, all I'd say is, one, the importance behind this. The importance behind the global pandemic money is to ensure that we have vaccinations across the globe. We can't get past this pandemic until more people are vaccinated. And we know that with continued variants moving forward, the key to that is the vaccination. That's why we continue to ask people to be vaxxed and boosted here in this country, but we have to acknowledge our commitment to play a leadership role abroad as well. That was the importance of this $5 billion. Now, we aren't going to, it appears that the Senate language is not going to have this included. This won't be the last piece of legislation that we do. And even some of the pandemic money that is included in here is in a limited window to go to states and to go to localities to make sure that we're investing in moving past this pandemic and the health and safety of the country. And so, with that in mind, there will be other pieces of legislation before we get to the appropriations bills, and so we're going to continue. But as we are with priorities that sometimes aren't addressed, we have to carry forward and ensure that the bill in front of us is not the last bill that the U.S. House of Representatives will do, and we will have other options moving forward. Thank you.
The pandemic will not be over for any of us until it is over for all of us, and House Democrats will remain committed, as Vice Chair Aguilar said, to doing what's necessary to crush this virus decisively, not just here in America, but throughout the world. Thank you, everyone.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, House Radio.